a small Romanian village in 1993, every single resident, from the elderly to infants, simultaneously lost the ability to sleep. Doctors documented the first cases with sterile precision, pupils refusing to dilate, eyelids physically unable to close, as if some invisible force held them open. Within days, the village descended into a waking nightmare where time stretched into an endless, sunlit hell. The air grew thick with the sour scent of unwashed bodies, and the metallic tang of panic sweat that never dried. Whispers began, not from the villagers, whose throats were raw from screaming, but from the walls themselves, a soft, papery rustling that followed you from room to room. Then came the sticky, cold sensation, as if an unseen, damp presence had just brushed past your arm in the still air. This wasn't insomnia. This was something peeling back the very fabric of consciousness, leaving these people trapped forever in the raw, unfiltered present. And the most terrifying part? According to the sole surviving doctor's notes, they all claimed to be wide awake, and yet they were dreaming. This isn't a nightmare. This is the waking world, twisted by something unseen. The air is thick with the scent of ozone and damp earth, a wrongness that clings to the skin. From the silent houses, a faint, wet scratching begins to echo. For 11 days in the summer of 1997, this was the fate of every soul in Millhaven, Ohio. They named the phenomenon the wake, and when it finally ended, madness seemed a mercy, a refuge where the mind might still find escape. Because even madness can dream. To comprehend the coming terror, you must first see Millhaven as it was. Population 2, 147. A place where front doors stayed unlocked, and trust was the default currency. The year's pinnacle was the Harvest Festival, a celebration of community and simple abundance. This was the before, a portrait of ordinary peace, soon to be fractured. John Miller was a high school biology teacher, a man who trusted only what could be measured and proven. His wife, Sarah, was a librarian, a keeper of stories who believed in the quiet, potent magic hidden within their pages. Their 8-year-old daughter, Lily, shared a common childhood fear, the monster that lived in her bedroom closet. But in the Miller house, the air sometimes carried a faint, coppery scent, and the silence held a tangible, waiting weight. It began not with a scream, but with a weary sigh. On the night of July 17th, Lily padded into her parents' room. Her tiny voice filtered through the dark. "Mommy?" "Huh," she whispered, the words barely audible. "My sleepy won't come." The air in the room felt thick and still, carrying the faint scent of ozone that shouldn't have been there. Outside, the fireflies Lily had chased at dusk were gone, replaced by an unnatural stillness that clung to the house. Sarah soothed her daughter and tucked her back into bed. An hour later, John lay awake, each heartbeat a stark percussion against the oppressive summer heat. He blamed the coffee, the humidity, anything but the growing unease coiling in his gut. By dawn, Sarah's phone screen pulsed relentlessly, her text chain with friends alive with frantic messages. "You up?" "Yeah, weird night. Couldn't drop off." It was a town-wide case of insomnia. Annoying, but explainable. A passing weather front, maybe. Stress. Day 2 arrived with a visible haze of exhaustion clinging to the air. The cheerful music from earlier began to distort, slowing into a low, dissonant drone. A sharp, metallic scent cut through the damp forest air, like ozone after a storm. Every shadow seemed to hold its breath, and the distant drip of water became a steady, maddening rhythm. People moved through their routines like ghosts, their motions hollow and automatic. At Pete's Diner, the coffee machine hissed nonstop, its mechanical rhythm the only constant in the growing strangeness. Conversations fractured into fragments, sentences abandoned mid-thought as minds stuttered against some invisible resistance. The air carried the faint scent of ozone and stale coffee, a tangible weight pressing down on the third day. John Miller sat grading papers when the ink on the page began to swim, drifting like minnows beneath a murky surface. In the library's heavy silence, Sarah heard a dry rustling from the periodicals, a sound of pages turning long after closing time. The air grew thick with the scent of aged paper, and something faintly metallic, like old coins. And Lily, who once chattered about the monster in her closet, had fallen into a watchful, wordless dread. For hours she remained transfixed, her gaze locked. The rustling intensified, woven with the ghostly whispers of children counting. Their distorted voices chanted the numbers: 98, 99, 100. It was day 4. No one in the house had slept for 96 hours. The town doctor stared, overwhelmed, as the sedatives failed to take hold. Sleeping pills scattered on the nightstand like useless candy, their promise broken. A cold, antiseptic scent hung in the air, laced with a new, metallic tang of fear. It was a quiet, impossible defiance of every biological law he knew. The body's desperate need for REM sleep was there, pounding behind every temple, but the gate to sleep was simply gone. This is when the sensory distortions began. Colors tasted sour, metallic on the tongue. The smell of rain carried the acrid, chemical scent of burnt hair. People would glimpse silent figures at the edge of their vision, always just slipping around a corner, or melting into a shadow that seemed unnaturally deep. John blinked, and the figure vanished, leaving only a faint scent of ozone and damp earth. The biologist grasped for scientific explanations. Mass hysteria, a waterborne contaminant. But the cold, sticky dread clinging to his skin defied logic. A distant, wet scratching sound echoed from the woods, followed by the iron tang smell of something long decayed. The air grew heavy, thick with the silence that now felt predatory, and every rational anchor in John's mind began to slip away. But every medical test returned perfectly normal. Driven by desperation, Sarah descended into the library's forgotten basement. She unearthed a crumbling ledger from 1897, its pages brittle with age. One handwritten entry documented a CC, town-wide lethargy, that paralyzed the community for an entire week. The official cause was recorded as miasma, but the village scribe's final note tells a different story. They are saying the shepherd is walking. The air in Millhaven grew thick with the metallic scent of ozone and the sweet, sickly perfume of decay, a palpable wrongness that clung to the skin. By the seventh day, a heavy, suffocating dread had settled over the town, its stillness broken only by the distant, rhythmic scratching of something moving through the underbrush. Millhaven had become a waking corpse, its heart a silent, cold stone in its chest, waiting for the final blow. The streets were deserted, but every window burned with unnatural light. A sick, silent magnetism drew the townspeople into the square, their movements stiff and unplanned. They did not speak, nor did they meet each other's eyes. They simply stood, a congregation bound by a dread they could not name. Hundreds of sleep-starved faces stared toward the old town clock, its hands frozen at 3:07 a.m. John cradled Lily, her small body rigid as stone in his arms. Sarah's grip on his hand tightened, her nails biting deep enough to draw pinpricks of blood. Then, in the heavy silence, Lily's lips parted, and she spoke for the first time in days. The voice that answered wasn't Lily's own, but a flat, chilling chorus that seemed to emanate from the very walls. It was a unison whisper from the crowd, a sound that felt cold and damp against the skin. He's here. The shepherd has come for the dreams. They all perceived it, not through their eyes, but within a collective waking nightmare. A vast, indifferent presence moved through the town, not on the streets, but through the space where sleep should reside. It wasn't harvesting souls, it was harvesting the potential of dreams. The stories left unwritten, the fears left unchallenged, the rest forever denied. It was feeding on the profound emptiness it cultivated. In that singular, horrific moment, John understood. The true horror wasn't a presence, but the yawning void it left behind. Their minds, stripped of sleep's merciful buffer, became raw nerves exposed to a reality never meant for human perception. Lily's monster wasn't lurking in the closet. It was the existential vacuum where her dreams had once lived. Now, only the cold, sterile scent of ozone and the oppressive weight of absolute nothingness remained. On the 11th morning, the collective nightmare shattered. A wave of exhaustion washed over Millhaven, and one by one the townsfolk fell into a deep, comatose slumber right where they stood. For nearly 2 days, the only sound was the soft rhythm of their breathing, a stark contrast to the relentless wakefulness that had gripped them. When they finally stirred, the waking world had returned, and the eerie distortions that had plagued their reality were simply gone. The world solidified into a fragile semblance of normalcy. They attempted to rebuild, their hands working with a quiet, desperate focus. Publicly, they maintained a vow of silence, the unspoken truth a cold, damp weight in every room. To the outside world, it was archived as a curious footnote, a case of mass psychogenic illness. Years later, the Miller house stood with a "for sale" sign, its windows like dark, hollow eyes. Inside, an older John stared out at the night, his reflection ghostly in the glass. Sarah flinched at every small sound, a floorboards groan, the distant hum of the refrigerator. The air in the room felt thick, carrying the faint scent of dust and something metallic. Lily sits rigidly on her bed, her back deliberately turned to the closet door in her new city apartment. But here lies the true horror, the twist with no end. Ask John Miller about biology now, and he'll change the subject with a sudden, palpable tension. Ask Sarah about stories, and you'll be met with hollow eyes and the faint scent of ozone, a silent terror they can never escape. Sleep isn't a necessity, it's a barrier, a merciful curtain drawn between us and the world's true, waking shape. Without it, reality's raw edges begin to press in. The air carries a faint, metallic tang, like old pennies and static. Every surface feels subtly wrong, too cold, or unnervingly sticky to the touch. A low, persistent hum vibrates in the bones. This is the price of seeing what lies beyond the curtain. She meets the lens directly, her young gaze holding a depth of knowing no child should ever comprehend. So tonight, when you extinguish the lamp and surrender to sleep, pray you find dreams. Pray with a desperate fervor, because the alternative isn't mere wakefulness. It's the horrifying realization that the darkness around you was never truly empty. The screen faded to black, a final, solitary heartbeat echoed in the void. Then, silence, thick and absolute, until the air was split by a soft, deliberate creak. It was the unmistakable sound of a closet door opening.